Welcome to New Day Saturday edition. Today is the 31st day of March 2018. It is the last day of March and indeed the last day of the first quarter of the year. We are truly grateful for how far we've come in the year. Good morning to you and once again welcome to the show. My name is Abna Tebi. As usual, we're running from now till just about 10 minutes to the top of the hour, 10 o'clock, where conversations will be brought to a close. But before then, we would have done some serious analysis of issues that have made the headlines during the week. But as usual, we're coming to you from the studios of TV3 here in Accra. We're also live on 3FM 92.7, also streaming live around the world online at 3news.com, also on our Facebook page, TV3 Ghana. Today's show, as usual, promises to be an interesting one, stimulating conversations to be had here. We encourage you to send through your comments to our WhatsApp number 050-0607-070, and we will share them with the rest of the world. What are we looking at today on the show? We'll start off with the Ghana First demonstration, which as you may recall, the NDC and other opposition parties, as well as some other organized groups, had attempted to stop the parliamentary ratification of the U.S.-Ghana Defense Cooperation Agreement last week by actually going to Parliament House with red armbands, etc., to demonstrate their protest. Now, despite this action, Parliament went ahead to ratify the Defense Cooperation Agreement. Now, the ratification notwithstanding, the protest continued this week with a protest march by a coalition of political parties known as Ghana First on Wednesday, 28th of March 2018. Now, the protest march, which drew hundreds of Ghanaians to the street in protest against the said ratified agreement, was led by leaders of various opposition parties. The former President John Dramani Mahama is reported as having endorsed the protest march through a post on social media. Now, a cross-section of Ghanaians, in the light of the knowledge of a similar pre-existing agreement under President John Dramani Mahama in the year 2015, found his condemnation of the present agreement to be rather hypocritical and put out a number of comments or statements out there. Now, we shall be looking at the protest march and matters arising. Also up for discussion, also related to this, is a comment by the Deputy General Secretary of the NDC, Mr. Kwaku Aidoho, and his subsequent arrest by the police. Now, in the run-up to the protest against the Defense Cooperation Agreement between Ghana and the U.S., Mr. Kwaku Aidoho, the Deputy General Secretary of the NDC and a former presidential spokesperson, in an interview with an Accra-based radio station, Happy FM, is alleged to have made some inflammatory comments and inciting a civil revolt against the sitting government, which comments were found or deemed to be treasonable. Now, consequently, Kwaku Aidoho was arrested by the police CID on Tuesday, March 27, 2018, a day before the protest march, at a press conference organized by the Ghana First Patriotic Front, which sought to garner public support in support of the protest march that was scheduled for the next day, which was the 28th of March. Now, he has since been granted bail. We shall be looking at the comments that he's alleged to have made, as well as the matters that have come from his subsequent arrest. And also up for discussion is news about the renaming of the seat of the presidency from Flagstaff House to Jubilee House. We shall be interrogating this and whether or not some closure will be brought to this long-standing debate about the name of the seat of the presidency, whether it's Flagstaff House or Jubilee House. Now, we do know that according to the president's statement, it is the Jubilee House, but for how long will it remain that way? Those are some of the questions we'll be asking. At this point, we'll take a break. When we come back, I will introduce to you the panelists for today's conversation. You're watching and listening to New Day Saturday edition. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is New Day Saturday edition, live on TV3, also live on 3FM 92.7 and streaming live around the world online at 3news.com. I'll quickly introduce the panelists for today's conversations and we'll dig straight into the topics outlined for conversation this morning. From my far left, we have Mr. Victor Adawudu. He is a legal practitioner and in recent times has been known as the counsel for Mr. Kwaku Ayidoho. Next is Dr. Bosman Asari. He is the head of the Political Science Department of the University of Ghana, Legon. And last but not least, we have Dr. Dominic Ayine. He is a private legal practitioner, also MP for Bolga East constituency, and a former Deputy Attorney General and Minister for Justice. Good morning to you, gentlemen, and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
It's very good to have you here. We're very grateful for your presence here. Quite a number of related topics, if you ask me, right from the Mr. Kwaku Ayidoho's arrest to the Ghana First demonstration, which led to, I mean, we heard about the reassignment of the BNI boards, which some people are, you know, speculating to have been linked to Kwaku Ayidoho's arrest and subsequent bail and everything like that. So quite a number of interrelated matters. But we'll start off with Mr. Kwaku Ayidoho's comment and his subsequent arrest by the CID. I would want us to start with a look at his comments, and then we would, you know, have our varied impressions about it. If we have an audio, we could play it, but otherwise I have it, the reproduction or the reproduced version of it here, and I would read it out just for purposes of this conversation. So his exact comments are that on January 13, 1972, a certain Colonel Ignatius Kutwe Champong led a movement that removed the Progress Party from power. Busia was the prime minister and Akufo-Addo's father was a ceremonial president. Somebody should tell Nana Akufo-Addo that history has a very interesting way of repeating itself. There'll be a civil revolt, there'll be a people's movement. During President John Mahama's tenure, didn't we receive similar threats from the likes of Let My Vote Count and Occupy Ghana? There'll be a civil coup d'etat, there'll be a social revolution, and the movement is starting on Wednesday. He, referring to Akufo-Addo, will be fed up with the presidency. I would want to start with you, Dr. Bosman, here. These are the comments that Mr. Ayidoho is alleged to have made on radio station. Tell us what you make of these comments.
Before I take off, let me say good morning to my other panelists and to wish Ghanaians in general a happy Easter, and especially my senior pastor and the wife, Isaac Boateng, Reverend Isaac Boateng MP, on this special occasion. Now let me come back to the comments. I think for many Ghanaians, or let me say for most Ghanaians who are politically discerning, and even within the establishment of the NDC, where Mr. Kwaku Ayidoho happens to serve as the Deputy General Secretary, I think most of them believe, and we've heard comments by senior members within the NDC establishment, that the comments were highly, highly unfortunate. We shouldn't forget some few years ago, he used to be the Director of Communication at the presidency. And this was a position many people came to view him as the de facto, even Vice President of the Republic of Ghana. So for someone who has occupied a very sensitive position, normally society expects a lot from you. And I know when he looks back, he would have realized that some of the comments, or perhaps the entire comment, was misplaced. Because when you do that, you make your political party very, very unattractive. Because the reality is that we are running a political system where the experts will tell you that the MPP and the NDC, they are positioned around 40 to 45%. So you have a middle, some discerning, independent people who don't identify with political parties, and they look at the individuals within the parties, then they make a decision that, oh, I think I want to go with the NDC, I think I want to go with the MPP. But once you have individuals who make certain comments, those comments make the parties very, very unpopular, and it sends a clear signal that either the party supports it or the party is not ready to condemn. So when these comments were made, people, I heard Mr. Siedun Ketia saying that, oh, this is not a position of the NDC, which I thought was very, very apt, very, very appropriate. When you do that, it sends a clear signal that if you are a member of the party and you make certain comments that are unacceptable, the party will not be there to defend you. So I think the comments are very, very unacceptable. We don't need those comments now. And especially for the fact that you were referring to the sitting president of the Republic, you were talking about his father. largely you were threatening the President of the Republic, which I don't think many democracies would take it lightly.
There are those who have said that this is his arrest is an attack on freedom of expression. I've heard, for instance, the the chairman of the PNC, for instance, said that. Do you, in the light of what you've just said, I suppose then that you don't necessarily agree?
I completely disagree with that, because let's be very clear, Ghana's democracy is a work in progress. The British Parliament has been there for more than 400 years. The US Congress, recently, they celebrated about 242nd year or so. These are countries where the institutions are firmly established. Even in these democracies, people's comments are well measured. And Ghana's the Parliament, is it 2593 to 2018, barely 25 years. So ours is still a work in progress. So for those of us who study democracy, we don't even describe Ghana as a democratic country. We say Ghana is a democratizing. We are in the process. Our institutions are not firmly built. That's why, Abna, you are a legal practitioner. Anytime there's a change of government, that's when we get to hear about corruption. Anytime there's a change, there's a new government, people in that government can do certain things and get away with it. But when opposition elements do same, they are held accountable. Because the reality is that our institutions are still a work in progress. And when you do certain things, you end up shaking the institutions and the powers that be. I think I even heard Mr. Siedun Ketiam making the point that, oh, they don't think the CID, he doesn't think the CID boss is well, and that the woman has been compromised, etc. Because even those who have served in government for many years, just leaving office 1 year, they still doubt the credibility of state institutions. And that's the system we are living with. So we just have to make sure that people don't just make certain comments. And if you don't act as the police, the BNI, it sends a clear message that others can do same, which is not good for our democracy.
Very well. Now, you raised an issue about the institutions of state and how they are seen. I think we have that play out even with this recent arrest of Mr. Koko Ayidoho here. And I would want to find out from you, Dr. Ayine, do you think the police exercised their discretion to arrest him appropriately? Do you think it was an appropriate exercise of their discretion? Did they demonstrate their professional judgment in view of the comments he made and the subsequent arrest? And I'm asking this within the back or against the background of what Doc has raised so far, in view, trying to suggest that depending on who is in government, it seems certain people are untouchable and others are touchable. So let's look at it within that context. Do you think they did exercise their power to arrest appropriately?
Well, thank you very much. When the police exercise their powers of arrest, it means that they have credible information relating to the commission of an offense. And I believe that when they heard Koko Ayidoho, utter those words on radio, they probably did some background work. I expect that they would have done some background work before exercising the power of arrest. Because without that background work, I don't see how they could support the arrest based merely on the words that he uttered. And that is because, you see, let us look at the utterances in their context. Right. The utterances made by Koko was pursuant to an interview granted on radio. And I believe that I don't understand Chui very well, but I believe that the questioner was asking him about the Ghana-US military cooperation agreement and the impending demonstration against that agreement. And his reaction must be looked at in the context of both the happenings that took place in Parliament as well as the demonstration that took place a few days later. And I believe that his utterances were a call to civil disobedience. Okay, I agree with the learned professor that he crossed the line when he talked about the 1972 coup and the possibility of a civilian coup. But even given that he was referring to a military takeover of government in the past, okay, his words could still be interpreted to mean that he was warning the current government that if it does not take its time in the implementation of this agreement, it could lead to a military takeover. it does not mean that Kokwa Nyidoho himself was in any way associated with an attempt to levy war against the government, an attempt to suspend, the operation of the Constitution, or any of the arms of government, and so on and so forth.
But wouldn't that be inciting then?
But no, you incite, if you look at Article 19, Clause 7 of the Constitution, incitement as an offense will only be triggered when the incitement is in relation to, the levying of war, okay, or any acts or attempts to suspend the operation of the Constitution. So until you have evidence showing that the words uttered were directed at another person to levy war, or a group of persons to levy war, or to suspend the operation of the Constitution, or overthrow the government of the Republic of Ghana, you cannot say that he has committed the offense of incitement.
But that would be subsequently to his arrest and he been charged, then we could look into that.
And so Abina, the question that you asked with respect to the police,
right.
When I was Deputy Attorney General, I used to say that, look, do not arrest someone and go back and look for the evidence, all right? You must have credible evidence of the commission of an offense. In and of themselves, I do not think that the words uttered by Kokwa Nyidoho constituted a treasonable offense, or even a misprision of treason. Okay, and then we can go into the details of those, offenses if we have time. Sure. But if the police themselves conducted background investigation, all right, and then found information that showed that there was a credible attempt to do any of the acts stipulated either in Article 1, in Section 180 of the Criminal and Other Offences Act, or in the case of mistreason misprision of treason, yeah. Section 181, or in the case of high treason, Article 3 of the Constitution, then they would have, been in a position to say that, look, we have credible information of the commission of an offense, and we want to arrest him and charge him with that offense. Now, from information that I was hearing, and I think that my learned friend Victor Adawudu is here, he would probably give us the inside story. Right. But what I was hearing was that they were charging him with some offenses, and then changing for the charge to to treason.
From high treason, then
it went from high treason to treason felony, and then to treason. All right, and then I heard something about causing fear and panic. I don't know how true it is, and so on. So it appears that the police themselves were very uncertain about what to charge him with, And again, Prof has said it. Our institutions, all right, are fledgling within the context of a constitutional democracy, but the police service has been there since independence. They've operated, under various constitutions and various military decrees. They are very professional in the way, they conduct themselves. But it doesn't mean that they are, they are removed from political pressures, the political pressures of the day. And so when you have a situation like this, where the sitting government takes a position that the comments uttered by an opposition political figure, are directed at it in a very undeserving way, all right? And then the police are now in the middle of it because they have to investigate to find out whether or not to bring charges to, against the person. Then you can see that is where the political pressure, whether subtle, or, overt, will come into play. And I think that, in terms of the institutional analysis, Prof is right. We are a fledgling democracy, but it doesn't mean that we should also, not. For instance, we are a young democracy, all right. But we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Best practices exist in other jurisdictions, okay. And I wonder whether or not, if an American citizen had made these comments on an American radio, either the FBI or the CIA will be nosing around his house to find out whether or not he should be arrested and for treason, because you can give you examples of statements that are even worse than this, based upon which no arrests were made. They would be seen as a call to civil disobedience, and then in the context of the reference to the 1972 coup, it will be a warning to the government that if it goes ahead with this agreement, it may lead to a military takeover of the regime. And that, to me, I think is even a patriotic duty of every citizen. Yes, for, you know, to say that, look, if you,
but
as
you
a
see,
government...
I think, sorry to cut you, but I think that maybe if that call to duty had been made on its own, perhaps then we wouldn't have, you know, had this level of reaction. But where he made that comment, having situated it within a certain background, then there's that link to suggest that this is your aim.
Not exactly. You see, Abina, the point is this. He prefaced what he said by referring to the impending demonstration as a civilian coup d'etat, all right? Basically, civil disobedience against the government. And I think that is how we should, that is the context within which we should situate the reference to the 1972, you know, I mean, a coup d'etat. Basically, for me, listening to what he said, especially the transcription, because as I said, my Twi is very bad, you know, I saw it as a warning to the government that the way and manner it is going about the implementation of, or not the implementation, but the execution of this military cooperation agreement could result in a coup d'etat. Now, if some people could say, look, is that a call or a signal to the military to step in? Well, that is, something that we can debate about. But I don't think that Koku's intention was to call for a military takeover of this government.
Very well. But what do you make of the immediate response from the NDC General Secretary, which quickly came in to disassociate the party from those comments? Well,
the General Secretary did what I thought was right in the circumstances. The National Democratic Congress, you know, its middle name is Democratic, all right, meaning that we subscribe to the principles of constitutional democracy. There's no way that the NDC will associate with, itself with, you know, a call, you know, to, for a military takeover of a government.
So because that would an admission that what Mr. Kokwaido who said was rather in bad taste? As I said, okay, he might have crossed the line a little bit by reference to the 1972 coup. Some may interpret it to mean a signal to the military to intervene. All right. Others may, simply say it's a warning to the government. In the case of the statement by Mr. Sedun Ketia disassociating the NDC from the comments, I believe that his interpretation or the party's interpretation was that, look, this might be interpreted generally as a reference, as a call to the military to take over. And we do not want that. We don't want this constitutional, democracy to be truncated by another military takeover. And remember that the Constitution itself, provides that where such a takeover, occurs, all right, civilians and every citizen of Ghana has a duty to restore the constitutional order. And so we don't want that to happen, and that is why the General Secretary came out quickly to disassociate the party from the comments. Very well. I'll move to Mr. Dawudu here. You are counsel for Mr. Kokwaido, so you would give us, the meat when it comes to the whole process of the arrest, how his detention went in the bail. But Doc mentioned something in his submission here, and indeed, Dr. Bosman also did that, which for me is key and should perhaps be one of the main points we are looking at as a fledgling democracy, or as a democratization, or what was the term? Democratizing. Exactly.
Present continuous.
Exactly, yes. Which is the institutions of state. And here you're looking at the police. Dr. Ayine in his submission made some allusions to the fact that, yes, there could be political influence. If such a situation exists, whether it's perceived or real, we do, have a sense of that. Because even with this instant case, there are people who are saying that his arrest was politically motivated, and it raises concerns. So how do we, ensure the independence of the police? And again, these comments coming in now raises concerns about similar arrests in the past, where they also motivated by some political influence or what? Because there are a number of similar arrests that were made in the past. What do you have to say about this kind of thing with our police? at the center of this, a police service that's supposed to be independent. Now we have this perceived or real talk about they being politically, influenced.
Abna, thank you. And let me say good morning to my seniors, the panelists here, and also say good morning to my pastor. Pastor, no, yesterday yesterday I was in church. I was in church, and effortlessly, the way he explained some of the passages, it opened up my mind.
Right.
And some of the things he said that when Jesus Christ died, there was darkness, and that Christ means is light. The whole place was dark. It was more revealing for me.
Right.
And good morning to my comrades and the people who supported us in this time. Now, you were talking about the police. What I have realized, and I know, is that the police, they are professionals. They work within some guidelines, within the law and what has to be done. But at the apex of it, we have the politicians who control the institutions. So you will find the police, what the law prescribes, or their code or service instruction prescribes that it should be done. They will definitely work within that. And let me tell you, if any institution in Ghana here wants to be professional and do their work, they will do it, especially the police. I've always told people that if they decide that they want to be professional and they said there's an armed robbery here, they will know the people and they can arrest them within a twinkle of an eye. At times, when they work within the ambit of the law, because we have the politicians at the top, they do not understand that this should go this way. That's where sometimes you cannot insulate the police service from the political interference and influences.
So it's not necessarily a perception. It is real.
No, it is real. Okay. It is real. Because at the apex of the institution, who appoints the
political appointed position?
Yes, the Inspector General of Police. There is a Minister of Interior. There's also a Minister for National Security. They all have stake in the protection of citizens. So you would see how all this, the arrangements, the working group. If you look at what had just happened, I had always held a view that what was the genesis of this matter? It was the disagreement to the Ghana-US agreement. And what was that? It was a government's policy. It was one of the things that they wanted to see to its fruition. And there had always been some disagreement. We saw the minority.
Right.
Now, we saw the NDC as a party which said we were vehemently opposed to it. What made the arrest look political was when they were having the press conference where people have massed and wanted to listen to what was being said. So you had the big wigs, the top echelon of NDC, you have the One Ghana movement, and the way they went to go and arrest the person smacks of some political. I believe if they had invited him and said, we the police, we have something in our custody, we want you to come and clarify, I don't think we will have all this. That's when you could see, let's differentiate, when the party general secretary has said that, yes, we've listened to some comments that are going around or was alleged that Koku has made. If those are the comments, it's not the position of the party. However, if it comes to the US and Ghana agreement, we are vehemently opposed to it. This is the genesis of the whole matter. And you could see that because he said there will have been a social revolution, I think, yes, we have become averse to coup d'etats.
Totally.
Nobody wants to hear that. Even the Constitution itself says that if there is a military takeover, we have the right to go against them, and it is legitimate. I'm sure it's the words of coup d'etat that came in that it sent some shiver down our spine and say, wait a minute, what is it? But we should also not forget that in our recent past, we have seen it. Social revolution, it happened in Egypt, it happened in Tunisia, and these are 10 civil disobedience. So I felt that it would have been nice that, look, these things could happen. That's why the Constitution has even given us right to demonstrate. We don't need permission from the police. You only have to inform them so that they will be able to protect, because that is the mandate that has been given to them. Yet, so I have always said, yes, if the tape has been given to us from the proper custody, that we will look at the tape and we think that he's exceeded the limit. Yes, Koku is a human being. We are fallible. Maybe he's being very passionate to communicate and say that we will resist this agreement. In communicating that, he might have said something which is unacceptable, inappropriate for the occasion. Although he feels passionately and right that this is what I want to say as a citizen of this country. And there are some duties that have been imposed. If you go through Article 41, it puts what are the duties of a citizen. In as much as they are duties, they are also responsibility. That you do not put anybody, any citizen's welfare in jeopardy. Right. So this is how I see it, that rails the political angle into this matter. The reason why people would also see it again as political was that the normal process is that when the police arrest you, they do their investigation. And this was the time.
But that problem, that process itself, perhaps it's turned over on its head, because typically you would, before you arrest, you should have done your investigations, and then when you're close to, you're sure that you have a solid case or you've gathered sufficient evidence, then you would effect the arrest. But it seems in Ghana, we do the arrest and then...
I'll give you 3 scenarios why in this particular instance you could smell the political interference of it. You know, when he was arrested, that's normal practice with the police. They arrest you, they take a charge, a caution statement from you. After caution statement, you can now ask for bail as a sequel to this. Now when he went there, they said, you're under arrest. We are looking at it. You made some comment. We are here to get the comment and we will look at it. And I said, yes, the law grants the police 48 hours to detain you when you're under arrest. So within 48 hours, that is what the law says they should do. It was that they said they wanted to search his house. You know, we didn't want to, because he feels he hasn't said anything criminal or treasonable. So why not? You can go to my house. We didn't even say what is a search warrant. These are senior police officers. So we obliged them. Let's go to the house and have a look at it. We went there, they did a search. On this occasion, you know, we made a request. And we said, look, you know what? You cannot trust human beings. You cannot predict. So we wanted to search the police officers who were entering, and for them also to search us, the lawyers and others, so that all of us will be on. And they obliged that. They said, and we went to the house, they found nothing. We came back. Statement was taken. Now, we started with causing fear and panic. Then afterwards, I think there was some consultation. They said, no, it should be high treason. Again, when the statement was taken, there was consultation and they said it was treason. They have the power. Because for me, if the proper charge is even put, when we go to court, it will not even give them the opportunity to come and say, I'm coming to substitute the charge. You have gone through all the meal. What actually happened that people started, like, there's some interferences. We had asked for bail. We had finished with the statement. You search his house. He had his phone on the table. One of the officers just stretched his hand and picked the phone from him. He said, okay, you can keep it. It was with me. He stretched his hand. I said, you can pick it. There is nothing on it which makes it treasonable. So you can keep it. Then, sequel to that, in the evening, we had the Minister of Information says, this is treasonable comment. It should be picked. So if you put all the dots together, if you start with causing fear and panic, and now all of a sudden they say it's treasonable comment, you know, it is not just by an accident, but you could see it's by design. That is where we asked for bail. It is when we ask for bail, you know, with the instruction, police instruction and everything, they know what to do from the steps. It's their steps. And they said, oh, we don't have instruction for bail. That coming from a senior police officer, it took us aback. Because you could tell us that, yes, we will grant you bail for ABC reasons, or we are not granting you bail because the law says we have 48 hours to go through. They said we were not granting us bail. That was where we departed from the police. At the end of the day, he was handed over to the BNI. And we went back the next day, asking that, grant us bail. You've taken a statement. And that's what we said. If within the 48 hours, you have two options. It's either you grant us police inquiry bail, or you send us to court. But after 48 hours, if you don't grant us the bail, and you don't send us to court, then you, as a law enforcer, you are breaching the law. So it will be a bad precedent for the institution to breach the law and expect the citizens not to also breach the law. That was the fix. So I was just looking at these two options, prepared that they will grant us the bail or they send us to court. So this is what actually happened. But you could see that there were a few, you know, on this occasion, I can tell you that at the BNI, they were professional with us. That's what gives me the sense that our institutions...
Even Mr. NewDay himself, after his release, was saying that
our institutions, if they want to be professional, they will be. If they don't want, if there is some invisible hands, that is when, and at the end of the day, we heap all the blame and everything on the institutions.
But you see, it's interesting that, I mean, I asked you earlier and you said yes, that the political influence is not a perception, but it's real. I would want to make reference to the president's, former president Mohammed's Twitter comments on that, which for me, again, something struck me in that about the political influence here. He says, as a party that prides itself in the non-criminalization of speech with a self-acclaimed human rights activist as president, the arrest of NewDay with armed men in the middle of a press event is obviously disproportionate. And then he goes on to say what he has said. Now here, he's making reference to the sitting president. And I'm asking myself, why? Is it the president who goes to arrest? The police is supposed to be an independent state, independent agency of institution of state, yes. So why do you rope in a sitting president? But clearly from what you've said here, not just you, I mean indeed from the panelists, all of you, that there is that level of political influence, which then makes people legitimately conclude that then perhaps the previous arrests that were made could have been politically motivated as well. Because back then, I could name a few. I mean, there was Kennedy Japan, Ernesto Usubempa of Fonka Games, there was Nana Dakwa, and I mean, these were all under, you know, NDC. So then, is that the case?
Let me give you scenarios. I believe that Samir Uku made some statement. He was not picked. Cabo also made statements. He was not picked. It was still under the NDC. You know what even makes it a little bit embarrassing, maybe for the president, is that he was the Attorney General who championed and said, no criminal libel. We cannot use this piece of legislation to criminalize speech.
But there's also a responsibility to yes. I mean, there's freedom of speech, but you also need to exercise some responsibility.
Definitely, you need to exercise that. So it is expected that if you now become the president and comments are being made at such, yes, the police could go on, look at it. However, when he, as a lawyer, will know definitely that what would be the ingredients for any offense. It's not naive.
But he's the president.
No, that's why I'm referring to the comment that was made. that this was somebody who championed that criminal libel, we don't want it again.
Yes.
It's being used to gag our journalists. It's being used to gag citizens who cannot speak their mind. There's difference between speaking your mind and the language. People could speak because, you know, when it comes to communication, people just speak anyhow. They spew negatives. Although they would think within themselves strong conviction that we are making a point, but that might not be it. So it is for the president who championed that criminal libel should go, and in his tenure, things are going this way, especially when they see that, yes, he's been arrested, we could have been granted bail, although the law has given them that 48 hours
to do so, yes.
If everything is done within 5 hours, you could say, yes, we are investigating you, we are granting you bail, but we'll be watching you, or we are investigating. But to keep him and say, okay, after 48 hours to send him to court, that is where people get a little bit. I think no decent person within the society is saying that if the actual text that is brought would say that, Koku, you did not exceed the line. Everybody thinks that, yes, you want to communicate this, but we think this was in bad taste.
So in that situation, what would you advise him to do? Maybe it's a speculative situation.
Yeah, that's what I've said.
But what would you advise him to do then?
I would advise him, when the tape is brought from the sister radio station, and we analyze it, and we say that, look, this was inappropriate. We are human beings. We are infallible. We would come and say that.
You're fallible.
No, yeah, we are fallible, sorry. We are fallible. We'll come and say that we think it was regrettable. But if we still feel that what we said, that was not the intention, but it's being twisted, we'll say, you know, we live in an era where tapes are doctored, things are edited, and some new words are put in it. So until we see it from the sister station and say this is the statement, then we can speak to that statement.
Very well. Dr. Bossman, is this really, this whole thing about police arrests under different different governments led by different political parties, don't we find ourselves in a, I'm trying hard not to, perhaps in a circus situation, that depending on where you are, you would be arrested for making certain statements. And again, I made reference to certain, some similar arrests in the past, and Mr. Dawudu here also brought in situations where people have said things but not necessarily been arrested and all of that. Again, clouding this whole judgment of the police to act appropriately. For me, it's quite worrying.
No, I think to a large extent it is not only troubling but very, very worrying. Because the reality is that, and also depending on where you find yourself, you see, what they are doing is excellent. But when you are on the other side, there is a problem. So I think all of us acknowledge that we have some fundamental flaws in our system. We don't allow the institutions themselves to work. Maybe if you are in the world of politics, I know Dr. Ayini as a former Deputy Attorney General, government will have a program. Government has a certain frame. You want things to be done in a particular way, and at times you look at the law. Can we make some, operate within the law? And interestingly, you are lawyers. The law is not science. You interpret it today, tomorrow another person will also look at the same thing, different. I remember I was teaching something, some law issues came out, and I was telling the students about how the civil rights movement in the U.S., there was this Plessy versus Ferguson, where a judge in the U.S. determined that somebody was only 25% black, 75% white, but the judge told him that this person was a black man. When actually 75%, exactly, later on another judge said, no, based on this, something must change. So that's the problem we are having. But I think, as I made an earlier point, that our society is still a work in progress. We are going to be bedeviled with some of these challenges, but the onus lies on the politicians to say that enough is enough. It doesn't matter whether we are in charge or we are not the people in charge. And the bad thing for us is that the greater majority of our people believe that if even you get a job in Ghana, it's because you know A, B, C, and D. If even a party has come. You may be an NDC, you may be an MPP, but you may not even get someone who knows a senior person who may not even be working for the party. And these things are, as he said, they are realities in our society. So I think moving on, politicians must work very hard. And you were referring to the statement of Mr. Mahama. When I heard it, I was like, but you were just the president. So are you trying to say that now if there is any arrest, it's effected under the watch of the president, which I know the president himself will look back and say, no, maybe I shouldn't have put it the way I did. And you know, we shouldn't also forget that the political interference, at times those are the helm of affairs. No, these are the people who appointed us. What can we do so that they will be very excited about? Yes, so it's not necessarily because the Minister for Interior or Security has said A, B, C, and D, but you are the one in charge. What can I do? Political pandering. What can I do so that the one who appointed me will see that I'm doing something? So it's not necessarily they've been called to do A, B, C, and D. But I was making a point that our parliament is only 25 years, so others have had it for several years. So, and I think from 93 till now, we've made some significant strides. So I'm expecting that in the next 10 to 20 years, we'll get to the point where our institutions will be firmly established, and we'll even be having a debate on the appointment of the IGP, on the appointment of some of these security personnel, so that when they are there, we know they can fully discharge their responsibilities. Because I know for many NDC people, they will see this arrest as politically motivated. Definitely. And I remember when Mr. Kennedy Atupon was arrested, many MPP people made the same comment. But as you said, we don't want to be moving forward and still referring to those statements. So I think the onus lies on all of us as a people to believe that constitutional democracy is the way to go. But if we are practicing it, let's make sure we do it very well. I was just reading a story on the BBC. Some people have invaded the farm of Mrs. Mugabe, Grace Mugabe, and they are doing galamsey there. And Mrs. Mugabe went there, and the people were insulting her. Now you are no longer in power. When you were in power, you came to the farm to you ejected us from the community. Now you are no longer there, to the extent that Mrs. Mugabe has gone to the police to report, and they are saying the police is not showing so that's the reality. Of so when you are there, make sure you do the right thing, so that when you are not even there, the system will still work very well. But on that note, I'll quickly come to you, Doc, and we'll take a break, but we'll come back to you too. But speaking about institutions working, it's interesting for me that Mr. Kwaku Aiyedoro, after his release, in saying that he wasn't manhandled and everything, ended by saying that Ghana is working. At least Ghana is working. I don't know if you heard that, but for me, that struck me. What does that say? Well, to you, to me, what it simply means is that the institution acted professionally, that he was not manhandled because of the political undertones, or if you want, overtones of his arrest. So when he said Ghana is working, it meant it was kind of a praise for the the police institution. I don't believe that he wanted that statement to be a general statement about the fact that Ghana is working, in the sense of things, everything else, So I believe that is we should look at it in that specific context. Very well. We'll take a break at this point. When we come back, we'll look at some things that happened subsequently to his release, which is being speculated in the media. We're looking at the reassignment of the BNI boss, for instance. We don't know exactly what the reason is, but there are some speculations we'll be looking at briefly when we come back from this break. You're watching New Day Saturday edition. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is New Day Saturday edition. We're live on TV3, also live on 3FM 92.7, and we're streaming live online around the world at 3news.com, also on our Facebook page, TV3 Ghana. Just before the break, we were looking at the arrest of the Deputy General Secretary of the NDC, Mr. Kwaku Aiyedoro, and matters arising. We'll be wrapping up on that and to move on to the Ghana First demonstration. But before we do that, we'll touch on the news that broke subsequently after his bail was granted, that
the BNI boss had been reassigned. Initially, I think what was out there was that he had been sacked, but that was debunked, and then we were informed that he had been reassigned to national security. Of course, we don't have any formal reason given as to why the move, but there are speculations that it had to do, or it's linked to the arrest and detention of Mr. Koku Ayidoho. We'll be looking at that briefly. Doc, if you could start us off on that. Your thoughts on that? Really, we don't know exactly why, but there's that news about his reassignment. Well, in the context of the operations of security and intelligence agencies, usually when a decision is taken to reassign or to remove someone, very rarely do you have reasons being given, right. All right, because maybe the reason will reveal, some security or intelligence information that, the public doesn't need to have. And so it often will leave room for, speculation. And I believe that we are in that situation now where we are all speculating whether it is linked to the treatment of Koku Ayidoho. Some people are even saying that it is because the former president was allowed, audience with Koku during his detention and so on and so forth. But I don't have sufficient information to be able to say what is the basis of the reassignment. And we can just take it that the Minister for National Security, in his wisdom, decided that it was probably the best move to make, to take him to a national security and away from the BNI. I do agree with that, but just again, not to question the professionalism of the people involved, but looking at the timing and the fact that yes, this is a political issue, or there are some political insinuations about it. Would it be the best of timing to do such a reassignment? Of course, like I'm saying, I'm not to question the person's professionalism or anything like that, but just looking at it from a distance. Well, I don't think that the timing was appropriate, given the political happenings that were taking place at the time that he was transferred. But again, we don't know enough to be able to say whether or not the minister should have waited a day or two or a week or even a month before doing that. Because this is an intelligence agency. We need to give them the benefit of the doubt with respect to whether or not, the timing was right. And hope they knew what, of course, they knew what they were doing. Yes. Quickly, Doc, on this.
I think as Doc has said, because the timing, I think they could have done better than that. And as he pointed out, normally within the intelligence agencies, there are certain things when you do, it's a routine practice, but coming on top of this particular perhaps political event, it sends a signal that maybe the man didn't act well. But when the information came out that it could be because the former president went there, I was not in a position to believe that, because someone who has served the highest position in this country, when somebody who belongs to his political party and he has been allowed to visit, I don't think the officer could be faulted because of that. So probably, as Dr. Ayini said, it's a routine practice by the intelligence agencies. And some of these areas, you don't have to give reason why certain things have been done, or someone has been resigned, etc. So I think we should give them the benefit of the doubt. I think Ghanaians we are more concerned about our security. So if by reshuffling or reassigning we will ensure that we are protected, we are secured in our country, I think it bodes well for us.
But Ghanaians also love their politics and love to speculate. And so when you give them a little space, then it gets,
As for the politics, all of us have become professional. We're always thinking about the next election, and I'm looking forward to the time where the district level too, we are going to be electing the DCs and others, and I think we are going to have an energized society where we are all politicized and we understand what it takes to elect a leader, what it means to elect A, B, C, and D. And I think when we get to that level, our society can only become better. Yes, politicized but not overly partisan. I think that's the thing. Yes, quickly.
I think that if you look at the Security and Intelligence Act, this is a matter which was within the purview of the police. However, the Act also allows the security agencies to collaborate. So it is not a matter that it's for the BNI. They only use their custody to keep Koku in the custody. So if there is anything, you even go to BNI, you really need the clearance of the CID before you even go there. When the former president was even coming, he had clearance. He needed to go and get clearance from the police. Even before he got to BNI, all the security protocols, he had to go through it.
So it couldn't have been the fact that, yeah.
I don't believe that, but even he that too, before then, I'm sure that the security, they had taken their decision already.
You never know.
But because it was in the political milieu, just to say that, maybe to appease some of the fanatics and say that, oh yes, he was released because one or two things did not go on well. So let's put it within the spoke. I think that they have their own reasons why the man was reassigned. And from unconfirmed sources, it had even happened earlier, before Koku's matter came in.
So it was already in the works.
It was already something that was decided. So I don't see the link between the arrest of Koku and what the BNI only provided their custody, and it was the police who were in charge in all this.
Very well.
As they've said, for security reasons, the safety of the people, they won't come and give it. And I'm sure the Constitution also says anything that borders on national safety and security, normally you are not, it's privilege. So let's leave it at that.
Very well. I mean,
if the politicians decide that they will give us reasons why he was reassigned, it is in their domain.
But they need not to do that necessarily, right? Okay. I mean, we can move on now to the Ghana First demonstration, which, like I said earlier, I mean, it's connected to this issue because that was around the Defense Cooperation Agreement, which the opposition to that agreement started, I mean, way back, but also continued this week, which led to the protest march on Wednesday. And it was at the press conference to pretty much garner support for the march that Mr. Anyudo, who was arrested. So we're looking at the march, what is sought to achieve, and whether or not it did achieve that. I'll start with you again, Doc. This agreement was ratified last Friday.
That is so.
And the march came on Wednesday. So looking at the scheme of things, I mean, constitutionally, the agreement had to be ratified to be binding on the state. So after it had been ratified, pretty much it was binding on the state.
Right.
So against that background, what was the march aiming to achieve? And did it achieve the objective? Okay.
You are right about the fact that upon ratification, the agreement becomes binding in terms of Article 75 of the Constitution.
Right.
However, that does not preclude citizens from protesting, the ratification or even the execution,
itself,
right, of the agreement. And the agreement is not self-implementing in the sense that once it is signed, okay, the parties, that is the United States and Ghana, will now take steps to implement the agreement.
Right.
In fact, one of the things that I raised in Parliament, unfortunately, I had to rush to the constituency for for an important funeral and could not take part in the debate.
Oh.
But one of the things that I raised in Parliament was that this agreement has annexes, right? That clearly showed how we're going to implement it. For instance, the definition of the facilities and areas, to be used by the United States and so on. So once the agreement has been ratified and is binding, it does not mean that citizens cannot protest the implementation. And then, there have been situations where actually American forces have landed and citizens have gathered to say, you know what, we don't want you on our soil, in other jurisdictions. So I believe that the demonstration was still very, necessary. For those who are opposed to the agreement, the implementation is yet to take place. And maybe, just maybe, the demonstration could also get the executives to change their mind. There are certain things in the agreement that, citizens do not want. For instance, the unimpeded access the unregulated access to certain areas defined in the agreement. For instance, the fact that Ghana has to provide a runway suitable to the United States forces for their use when they are, bringing their, aircraft into the country and so on and so forth. So it could also let the executive say, look, can we take a second look at the...
After they had executed and Parliament ratified?
Yes, that is possible. That is possible because, the executive could also serve notice that they want to terminate the agreement because of the, civil protests that are taking place. They can, under the agreement, you can serve 1 year's notice, of termination.
Exactly.
And the executive could say, look, given what is happening in the country, given the mass protests taking place against the agreement, given the fact that the people of this country think that it is not welfare enhancing, okay, we want to exit the agreement, or want to substantially renegotiate it in order to bring in provisions that will, give assurances to the people of this country that when the American military, come here, okay, they will be regulated in a manner that will inure to the benefit of the people of the country. So I think that that
was the objective, and you think it achieved it.
Yes.
But on the bit about a possibility to take a second look at the agreement,
right?
Wouldn't you say then that the minority perhaps missed out on that opportunity when the minority walked out at the time this was being considered?
If you know how Parliament works, you would understand that at the point when we walked out, the minority, at the point that we walked out, there was nothing we could do, okay? At the level of the committee, if you look at our standing orders, we are supposed to do clause by clause, okay, reading of the agreement, and then clause by clause reading of the report of the joint committee. Because remember that it was referred to Defense and Interior as well as Constitutional, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs. And then the report will be submitted, okay, outlining the views that have been taken by both the majority and the minority. All right. Now, when the report was being drafted, okay, usually it is the clerks who draft the report. Our side made, important points about certain clauses in the agreement that we were opposed to. For instance, Article 18, basically outs the jurisdiction of the courts of Ghana. And we made it clear that that clause was potentially unconstitutional. Because what it then meant was, means is that if any of the provisions of the agreement, all right, is found, or the operationalization of the agreement itself is found to be unconstitutional, okay, a citizen of Ghana cannot go to the Supreme Court to say that we want a declaration that Clause X of the U.S.-Ghana Military Cooperation Agreement is unconstitutional. Okay, so that in itself was, very problematic. Now, if you
but on that particular clause, isn't it redundant then, given that we know that parties cannot contract out to oust the jurisdiction?
Well,
it's there, all right, but it's of no effect, really.
But you see, let me even refer. That we have a Visiting Forces Act. Okay, that is Act 117 of 1962. And it spells out quite clearly what is the jurisdiction of our courts. And civil courts, as defined under the agreement, are allowed to try, the visiting forces, okay, for criminal offenses that have been committed in relation to Ghana, not in relation to, say, property or the person of the visiting forces. All right. So we could have also adopted the approach in the Visiting Forces Act in order to be able to draft, the clause on the settlement of disputes. But of course, if you say it is what is the
redundant.
word used? Redundant or odioous, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Then it means that until such a time that a citizen takes the matter to court, it becomes it is the binding clause, between the parties. One thing that probably the saving grace in that particular clause is the fact that it says that unless otherwise mutually agreed by the parties. So both Ghana and the United States can agree that we will submit this dispute to a court in Ghana, for a resolution. But again, back to the parliamentary process. We protested against certain clauses. But then when the report was submitted, we made it, Honorable James Agalga who is the ranking member on Defense and Interior, made it abundantly clear that we had dissented. All right, so it wasn't the case that we supported the adoption, the wholesale adoption of the report. But then at the debate stage, when you know that you can only have your say, but that the majority will have their way, what do you do? Right?
Have your say anyway.
Well, we did have our say at the level of the committee, at the level of the joint committee. We did have our say, and then usually debate is moderated by the speaker. All right, and then this speaker, rarely gives, ample opportunity for debate. Usually he will say, 2 from the minority and 2 from the majority with leadership. So most of us will be cut out in the debate. From the debate, and that is how come that we thought that at that stage there was nothing that we could do, and we walked out. And
then you had this march hoping to have things turn around. But whether or not we'll see any thing positive coming out of it, it's just a matter of time we need to look at. But Doc, let me go to Mr. Dawodu here, and then I come to you, Doc. We can't have this conversation and not talk about the fact that, yes, there was some pre-existing arrangement, in 2015 and of course 98. And that has been some of or perhaps the basis on which some people have said, well, the minority perhaps is not acting in good faith, or they're being hypocritical about the whole process. But of course, the minority is also counteracts that argument by saying that, well, this is an enhanced version of that with certain clauses and all. But if you're looking at the pre-existing arrangement as against what we have now, you do realize that, yes, there are certain similarities. People have talked about the tax exemptions and all. It was already in the 2015 or 1998, for instance, that one, that agreement had that. And other similar arrangements, the grant of diplomatic immunities to them already was in existence. So not necessarily, a new thing. Against the background, there are those who are saying that perhaps instead of, a blanket opposition to that, perhaps there should have been a targeted approach to it, i.e., yes, let's have a look at it in this way. But all along, the impression has been, it's a no, we are not ready. But Doc here is saying that, yes, that we could have had a look at it to make it better, but that is coming after it has been ratified. Do you see that there could have been a way of, dealing with this situation in a more beneficial way?
Yeah, let me deal with it in these 2 ways, but I'll preface it with a statement or a proverb.
Sure.
I believe that the present government dug a grave, wanted to bury somebody, but they are burying themselves now, and they don't want to be seen buried. You see, Article 75 grants the president to enter into such agreements. This agreement normally is diplomacy. The 2 states and others come together and they look at the treaty or any of the conventions that have to be ratified. It's true, some agreements were signed in 1999, for military cooperation, 2015. However, even if the government of the day that signed did not send those agreements to Parliament to be ratified, there was a way they negotiated it. When the Gitmo issue came up, it was this present government that went to court and said this agreement, it has to be ratified by Parliament. And the Supreme Court laid down the principle that any agreement which will be signed should now be scrutinized by Parliament. And the yes, and majority, it is 1/2 of members of Parliament that would have to ratify it. This is where they find it difficult now. And now that society, the populace, knows the content of the agreement, because the moment you lay it in Parliament, it's a public document. And everybody says, no, we cannot allow some of these provisions to go in. I believe that the best thing they should have done was to prepare the ground and renegotiate and look at the terms. But rushing it through, you see how society is reacting to it. And I'm sure upon hindsight, they will have said, we shouldn't have taken the step we took. Now that is the position. That they went to court. No, they went to court, and Supreme Court says this is the procedure. That is what the law says.
Yes.
And every agreement that will now come, we will sign with any state, will now have to go to Parliament, and we will scrutinize it.
But you're making it sound like it's a bad thing to send it to Parliament.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not making it like it's a bad thing. You know, hitherto, when these agreements come, you know, it is looked at, just like Dr. Ayini has said.
Right.
All the parties would sit down. Let's have a look at it. We think
without
this provision,
recourse to the citizens.
Yeah, without recourse to citizens. Even with that, most of them, they were not going to Parliament, which at the end of the day, if they were satisfied and this, but because we have gone, they've laid that principle, it is done. That's what we are saying, that if society, which the parliamentarians represent, are now revolting against it and saying that,
call it a revolt?
no, yes,
okay,
because they've disagreed. Yes. I don't think it is about the corporation. It is some provisions within the agreement.
Yes,
those provisions within the agreement. It's what they are reacting, and they are saying that we cannot mortgage our future to the United States of America. I believe this is the agreement that is before them, or it's a law, it's a binding law, as we say now. How do we go about it? Let's have cool heads. Let's have cool heads within society, especially the onus is on government to make sure that we listen to the citizen. We also have an interest at stake. We've been cooperating with the United States all these years.
Yeah.
How do we make it so that it becomes a win-win situation for all of us? But if we all take entrenched positions, I think it will linger on, and it will not inure to our benefit as society. Because I'm not too sure that the United States of America, it's also happy that this agreement has been exposed.
The way it has, yeah.
Yes, they also have responsibility to protect their citizens here. To protect their citizens here. So I would only say that let's have cool heads. Let the leadership sit down with all stakeholders and see how they could go about this. You know, Harry Kissinger, you know, the diplomatic shuttle, there is a way to negotiate it. There is a way it becomes beneficial to us. It's always been there. Let's see that what are the clauses that are making things difficult for us, that are wreaking emotions. You know, when it comes to some of this things, religion, politics, it gets to a point people don't want to think again. They think we have strong views. Yes, we cannot take entrenched position and say that the agreement is no. No, I think that there are benefits we need to look at. I think on this score, that is all I can say, that this agreement, it's something that will bring disagreement between citizens, or the rule and the rulers, and this should be something the government should look at and see how we can go about it.
Okay, two things. On the issue about citizens having a role to play here, and they showing their opposition to this and linking it to the Gitmo. I think for the Gitmo, you said that this government went to court. I believe that there were citizens that went to court.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Definitely.
So the citizens also exercising their rights, saying that, well, we don't think this arrangement here, bringing two people from former detainees from Gitmo to this country, is necessarily beneficial or will be beneficial for us. So I think that we need to get that, you know, clear. To say that it was the government that sent it.
I'm not saying it was a wrong thing.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to put out is this, that hitherto, it is always negotiation between the foreign affairs, government, and the other states. It's more of the negotiations that it's done. And when these negotiations are done, then the implementation takes off. So we could negotiate it and say, we don't think this endures to our benefit. This, when the people get to know and that we leaders have negotiated this, they will not be happy with us. That is what was hitherto was being done on a diplomatic level.
And you think that was a smooth sailing one?
No,
as opposed to?
I always say when you go to court, you can get judgment, you can get everything, but does it bring reconciliation? Does it bring reconciliation? You can have all your rights given to you. This is the position. But do you have peace? Do you have reconciliation?
That's why you go for ADR.
That is why, that's why sometimes it is good that you negotiate and you discuss things, which becomes beneficial to all. Very
well. But in the context of a provision like Article 75, which requires a certain act by, the executive and Parliament, you're raising issues about, okay, so are we compromising on that particular constitutional provision or what?
Exactly. You see, the way government works in reality sometimes is misunderstood, by citizens. In the context of the Gitmo, agreement, okay, the position of government was that because it was by exchange of diplomatic notes, note verbals, all right, there was no agreement strictly and properly so-called to be laid before Parliament. All right, that was the position, and I personally argued that position before the Supreme Court. Of course, the court disagreed. All right, but you see, there are certain practices and conventions of governments that I think we are throwing to the dogs, and it is not good for our country. All right, whether we are looking at NDC or NPP, it does not augur well for the way we deal with other governments. All right, confidential or secret information submitted to us by other governments must be kept confidential and secret. If the President of the Republic transmits a document to Parliament and the document is stamped secret and confidential, parliamentarians, I mean from the Speaker to every parliamentarian, we need to treat it as a secret and confidential document. All right, it does not become, it is a public document, but it is a different breed of a public document. It is, and I'm very, very serious about it, because we have the State Secrets Act, right? We have the oath of secrecy that we swear, when we are being, sworn in as parliamentarians and so on. Both the State Secrets Act and our oath of secrecy that we take, the oath of, under the Constitution, okay, are obligatory in terms of how we treat this type of classified documents. So for me, there need to be some convention in Parliament whereby if the President, whether it is Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo or a subsequent, President of the Republic transmits a document to us and it is marked secret and confidential, all right, the Speaker has to ensure that it is that way. It is transmitted and every parliamentarian is told that this is a secret and confidential document, and that deliberations both in committee and at plenary, okay, can take place, in a confidential manner. Of course, when a document is classified, there are certain aspects of it that need not be brought to the public. Okay, it doesn't mean that the entire document should not be debated. We can debate the agreement in general terms, but the way we handle this, these type of issues. Okay, for instance, the Gitmo. Okay, I can now say this publicly, right? The United States Embassy submitted, confidential documents from the Department of Defense directly to the Attorney General, and they made sure that they had a high level of officer from the embassy that directly submitted the documents to me on behalf of the Attorney General of the Republic. All right. And then I submitted I went in and showed them to the Attorney General. We reviewed them between us. We didn't allow any state attorney to see them. Right. All right. And then I made reference to them in our arguments. The Supreme Court, the counsel on the other side asked to see the documents and I refused. Okay. The Supreme Court had to, order. Made an order. Yeah, for the documents to be viewed in camera. In camera, right. Okay. As state officials, we need to take this very, very seriously. And I think that the way Parliament handled the casualness with which we all handled this document, which was marked secret and confidential by the President. Now, if we want to challenge that, we can do so by asking the president the reason why he's marking this document as secret and confidential. All right, but we cannot, as public officials, treat the document, like leaking it on social media and so on. For me, I was against that, and I think that it was bad.
Very well.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think Mr. Dawodu, we were making a point, and he came in with that interjection. So
I think entirely he gave an input into what actually works. So for me, still there is an avenue open. The agreement says that we can serve notice to terminate it.
Notice, yeah.
Do we terminate this agreement and look at it so that we can bring a new agreement? I think the fact that it will delay does not mean that whilst what was to be implemented, a new agreement cannot be brought. I think it is in the hands of government. They have the diplomats, they have people at the foreign affairs, and I'm sure with Parliament they can discuss this, which will inure to the benefit of all the parties.
Very well. In talking about this agreement and the fact that the citizens' views were, needed, and citizens have shown their opposition by the protest march and all, it brings to the fore the question about how citizens understand these issues. And again, Dr. Ayine in his submission, I think, alluded to that fact that sometimes maybe the citizenry misunderstands the processes and procedures of government. And it's not for nothing that certain issues are to be handled in a certain way. Now, in garnering support for this protest march, the argument was, let's have people show their, utmost opposition to this. And so, yes, there was that movement and all. And it's part of, advocacy, rallying around causes. But in as much as numbers are important, you also need the people who are backing the cause to have a certain level of appreciation, to understand what it is that they are protesting about or what they are endorsing. Now, we've seen some, if you like, videos going around of interviews of some of these persons. And for me, I look at them and I'm asking, trust me, I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence here, but this is just to put concerns out. Do people really appreciate what it is they are protesting against? Clearly, we've had some of the interviews going around, and clearly they are misinformed, if you like. And why is that? So somebody is demonstrating against this because of a certain perception that the American soldiers are coming down here and are going to have their way with women here and all. Clearly that is not the case. So isn't it important that in garnering support, mobilizing people, there's a certain responsibility also on those doing the organization or organizing to ensure that the people really understand what it is they are protesting, Doc?
I think largely you have made the point, because I also listened to some of the interviews and you realize that people were just there because they've been told to come there, not necessarily because they understand the real issues at stake. But let me say this. I think one of the key issues, challenges we face, since Dr. Ayine made the point that it was supposed to be a secret document, but we know in Ghana, once it's going to Parliament, definitely it's going to come out. I think that the government should have done a lot of PR work very, very well. Because on this issue, the government allowed the opposition to set the agenda. I think one of the media stations broke the story. I wasn't in Ghana at the time, but I noticed that the opposition started talking about it. But normally, with the sensitive nature of this particular agreement, I would have expected government to get people to explain to the people. So that's why we are having this situation. People are following because they don't really know what is at stake. Well, when you look at it critically, I don't think for the leading opposition figures, they want the entire agreement to be cancelled or abrogated. The idea is that there are certain provisions. For example, people talk about the unimpeded access, the runaway, a whole lot of things. But when you look, in principle, we are for it. Well, let's be very clear. You are friends with the only superpower in the international system, and this is something not many countries will take it lightly.
Who
and Ghana
sees you as a certain kind, whatever.
We shouldn't forget that apart from even this military cooperation, there are many things we know. I think Honorable will know better than me. The Millennium Challenge account. I think we've been given the $540 40 million or so. We look at our best road, the N1, if money from the US, and based on information I even gathered, the US was alarmed because when they gave us the money, we even engaged Chinese contractors. That's why in the current compact, most of the expert contractors are coming from the US to benefit. So you look at, we are getting a lot of help from them. And one thing we shouldn't also forget is that when you are friends with countries, don't expect that always you are going to be receiving. At times, you must also let go of something. So when you take all that into consideration, we have, it's a legitimate concern we should be raising about the sovereignty issue. But I expect that when it comes to the execution and the implementation of the agreement, the two countries will understand that because of the way citizens in Ghana are expressing varied opinions about it, certain things must be done. In the president's inaugural address, he said he wants Ghanaians to be citizens, not spectators. And I think the demonstration is one of the way, and I think the president will welcome informed citizens.
Yes, informed citizens, yes.
I think the president will welcome it, but as you rightly pointed out, we need to do a lot of public education. And now the good thing is we have local radio stations in almost all our local languages. So government should have engaged their communicators to what this is what we are doing, what are the benefits. I think some of us didn't even know there was 2015 agreement. There was 19. Many people, and I know there may be some parliamentarians who didn't even know, even on the government side, they may not probably NDC side. So I think this, I think we need a lot of public education. Our citizens must be educated to understand why are we entering into this agreement with the US. And once these things are there, government becomes, will be in a position to know that, oh, citizens support. But under the current environment, I know the implementation and the execution will take into consideration certain factors. Well, I don't think it will be in our interest to terminate. There may be certain changes that will have to be made.
We just need to fine-tune it some more.
And Abner, you see, the media has a role to play in this. Sure. Because an informed citizenry, you know, is partly a function of what the media, you know, puts out. So, for instance, in the context of this agreement, there was media information about the fact that, you know, the U.S. is not going to pay any taxes and so on. And I heard ordinary citizens saying, how come we are paying taxes and America is not going to pay taxes, right? But if you look at the diplomatic communities, you know, I mean, the Diplomatic Relations Act, right? You cannot tax a foreign sovereign, okay? And I mean, the history is, you know, I mean, replete with examples where, you know, countries went to war because of taxation. All right. The only way by which you, for instance, if there's a default and you want to, I mean, enforce the payment of the tax, is to levy a war. And no country wants to be going to war in order to collect taxes. So, I mean, it's a matter of the, I mean, the taxation is, you know, in relation to the diplomatic status of the forces. All right, once they are granted diplomatic status, or even the fact that they are American forces, if they bring anything in, you cannot levy taxation on those. So the media has a role to play, because the media also put out this information that, oh, they won't even be paying taxes and so on. And there was a cartoon, I think it was Joy FM that did it, really very educative. Okay, but it was to a certain extent misinforming the public about the true legal position of the document, or some of the clauses.
Yes, it is true that that provision is in there, but it has a certain
context.
Fantastic. It has a certain context, and that context is what was missing, perhaps, in the education. In the education, which is important. Yes.
You know, the U.S. is not a member of the International Criminal Court, although they've been supporting
for obvious reasons.
And you know, when they say U.S. personnel will not be prosecuted locally, the U.S. is one of the countries where, when their people commit sins or crimes outside, they make sure they deal with you because you are embarrassing. And I think we know, Honorable, will know, when you are a U.S. citizen and you pay bribe in a foreign land, you'll be prosecuted. So they have the legal system in place to ensure. So when they say their citizens will commit a crime, or their soldiers and Ghana cannot deal, it doesn't mean those people will go scot-free. So some of this education, if they have gone on, people will understand that, oh, it's not they can come here and do whatever they like. Their justice system will deal with them.
Exactly, right. Mr. Dow, do you have any comments on
this?
Yes,
you see, government still have the responsibility to make sure that they give information, adequate information, sufficient information to the citizens. in a democratic society, when you withhold information or you do not expatiate and explain, these are the things that you need. It is to your own detriment. Because if the information had been put there, government has the machinery. They have the Ministry of Information, they have the stations. They should be press briefing and explain things to people. But when you withhold information, citizens are asking for information, they are not getting the information because there is that perception that the gap that if we give them this information, they will react. And for their reaction, we should manage it, we should not give it to them. It's counterproductive. I always believe that there is information, enough of information that should be given to citizens, and they will be educated. A well-informed society even makes your work easier for you. But when they want to keep the citizens in ignorance, the citizens would behave ignorantly, and you would see that what you were preventing not to give them, they would get it from unlawful means. And at the end of the day, does it inure to your benefit or not? Governance is a very complex thing that they will have to look at it. I believe that information flow should be something. It's one thing, I believe one day it will get to the Supreme Court to see the right to information. The bill is not being passed. Already, the court has even pronounced on it, exactly. High Court. But you will go back and you want some information, it will be very, very difficult for you to get. So why are you not giving the information? And if you don't inform the people, expect that they will act ignorantly against you.
And that would just be a whole expensive enterprise. A waste of time as well. So yes. Very well. I'll take some messages here and then we'll go for a break. He says, this one is coming in from Kwekuni. He says, I wonder when we will grow as a country. We have come of age, but we don't learn. This tit-for-tat approach won't make Ghana any better. I feel NDC and NPP should be disappointed because none of them can boast of any significant change to the life of Ghanaians. God is watching. Percy in Kumasi says, the reassignment of the BNI boss has nothing to do with the arrest of Koku. However, President Mahama sought permission from the top before visiting Koku. The reassignment is an independent decision. It's never connected to the arrest of Koku. This one says, NDC must keep quiet because if there is any blame on changing... Okay, you're talking about Flagstaff House. We'll come to that shortly. Good morning. Please, Nanado and the NPP government should spare us Mr. Koku, whose comments shouldn't have been taken so seriously to lead to his arrests. So couldn't the CID have invited him personally for him to clarify things? I really don't understand why this house and his electrical gadgets were searched. So is the NPP government trying to tell Mr. Koku, who is having a secret chat with some civilians in private, to overthrow the president? That is Yusuf in Ashaiman. Good morning. To be frank, the police are professional, but they have flopped and failed when Koku was arrested without investigating the matter, which would give the basis for the arrest. The police and the NPP have been biased in arresting Mr. Aidohu. This is Emmanuel. This one says, Mr. Koku, who is a legitimate citizen of Ghana, and his statement was in line with the way the NPP government wants to willingly give out our sovereignty to the U.S. for reasons best known to the president and his appointees. So he did not say anything wrong, and people made more treasonable statements than what he said. Another one coming in from Percy says, okay, no, I think I read this already about the reassignment of the BNI boss. Hi, up, and I think Koku's statement of Ghana is working is a sarcastic statement, because if Nanado and his NPP party say Ghana is working and arrest and search is conducted without a warrant, then Ghana is truly working. So you're also being sarcastic with the last part there. I get it. It is interesting to notice that even the NDC distances itself from the comments. This is because coup, whether military or civilian, is dangerous for politicians, even though it might be helpful for the people. Through Western style of government known as democracy, politicians tyrannize the masses. This monster called democracy is the cause of the problem of the masses. It is. Are you sure democracy is the cause of the problem? I mean, it's the best governance system we can have. Hi, Abna. I think Koku's statement of Ghana is working. Okay, I read that already. It's rather unfortunate that He says, Mr. Daudu refused and cleverly dodged your question about previous arrests being political. He did answer. When they appear, they should know those of us watching are also smart. Okay, that's answer. Thank you very much. On that smart note, we'll take a break. When we come back, we move on to other topics. You're watching New Day Saturday Edition. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is New Day Saturday Edition, live on TV3, also live on 3FM 92.7 and online at 3news.com, also on our Facebook page, TV3 Ghana. We'll be wrapping up on the Ghana Fest demonstration very soon, and then we'll move on to the renaming of the seat of the presidency from Flagstaff House to Jubilee House. We'll do that quickly, but let me take some messages before I return to the panel. This one coming in from Aram Adenta in Adenta News Site. He says, Abna, good morning to you and your panelists. I don't agree with what Koku said, but listening to what you just read, I believe it's been blown out of place. The presenter helped Koku to actually explain himself, and I believe it cleared the air better than taking the initial speech. Also, the action the police took to arrest him at a public gathering was sickening. Barima in Jini says, Koko Aidohu's arrest and detention was much ado about nothing. It is only in Ghana that the police goes to your house to search before going to court for an order to do same. This diversion won't work. The sale of Ghana's sovereignty for a paltry $20 million would continue to be fiercely resisted. They are only clutching on straws. Good morning, Abner and your panelists. Please can... okay, I'm not going to read that. It's not in good taste. I'll move on. I don't understand why reference is always made to the Constitution for the legality or illegality of an act as if the Constitution is divine. Hello, it is divine. It is divine. So let me move on. Orako Kumasi says, I'm saddened by the ignorance of our so-called political leaders. U.S. military deployment around the globe is for military dominance. Please read about U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, and most seriously, the document Rebuilding American Defenses and Project for New American Century. That's the PNAC. Well, I'll pull the brakes on the messages for now and then return to the panel. I will now, Mr. Daudu, this last message here I think is quite intriguing about the perception of U.S. seeking dominance over the world with their, deployments and these requests for cooperations with states. I said perception. Is it a perception or reality? Do you get the sense that that's an American strategy, which is why some people are very much against these kinds of arrangements?
We have always seen, like they're saying, that the cooperation has always been there. America would always want to be a step ahead every time, especially now that they see the East, it's also coming up. So they will step up the plate. And what do? It's the corporations that they go. And, America has interest in a lot of things. And they will always want to protect their citizens everywhere they are. So these are the reasons why they would always want to have a base or have cooperation that they will be able to. I'm sure one of the corporations you have seen, although it was with Ghana, the interest was in Nigeria to root out this Boko Haram, right? They are doing the agreement with us, but the intention, the interest was in Nigeria. Those are things that when it comes to the military cooperation, America would always want to be ahead. In reciprocity to that, even I believe our military officers and personnel, when they move from here and they go to that jurisdiction, I think some courtesies and privileges are extended to our people also. So it's a mutual cooperation. But the problem you may be having with this one is that people feel the level, it's lopsided. Yeah, it's lopsided. And that is why people are agitating against this. It still comes back to issue of education. What do we benefit? What do they benefit? What is the limit? We can say that, no. Even if you are poor, there is pride. You can't say that because you are feeding me, this is what you need to eat. What I give you. Yes, in as much as they give us assistance, we also, as human beings, feel that there is pride. This is the land of our ancestors. We will give birth to our people here. We will die here. And this is where God chose and gave to us. So we will not allow that anybody should come and take control and say that this is what we are doing. I think that is, if we have that understanding, and the Americans also know that that is the land that has been given to them by their forefathers and God, I believe that we'll be able to entertain them very well. You know, our hospitality, it goes everywhere. The Ghanaian hospitality, it goes everywhere. So if we define the limit, if we define the limit and they also know the limit, we know our limit, I don't think that this should be a problem.
Very well. Dr. Bosman, your
just to add to the America, I think recently, you know, the 2018 U.S. budget, military budget is about 700.
It's the highest.
And Mr. Trump was saying that he wanted to see the U.S. dominating. And when you look at the figures, the U.S. is, when you combine the 28 countries that make up the EU together, the U.S. military budget is more than all of them put together. And even the top 8 spenders after the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Russia, China is second, Saudi is, you put all of them together, they are nowhere near the U.S. I think it's an American policy which in international relations we normally talk about realism. The idea that they must be at the top, and when they talk about cooperation, all these things are very, very significant. And now we hear a lot of China has made a lot of significant strides in our continent. So many think that the U.S. and others, they cannot just sit there. Yesterday, I was listening to the U.S. Acting Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Donald Yamamoto, and he was making the point that not that the U.S. doesn't want China to be in Africa, but there is a clear indication that if they are not very careful, the democratic progress that has been made in Africa will go down, because the reality is that some of the stringent requirements the US, Europe, and others will expect from Ghana, maybe China, they won't talk about human rights, because for all you know, in their own country, the human rights record are not that perfect, so they will not have that moral authority. So the US recognizes that they must be at the top of everything. They must be dominating. So when you have a country in that particular mode and you are Ghana, I think you find yourself in a very, very difficult situation. But I think Ghanaians...
Mr. Dawood is saying you can be poor, but you also have your pride.
No, but I think Ghana too, we are also looking out for our interests. I think the lawyer made the point that when our military personnel also go there, certain courtesies are extended to them. And I think the U.S. ambassador made the point that 20 million we are getting. I think one of your, those who sent the message said we are selling the country for that. I think that one is a complete misinformation. I think this is money that will go to the military to help with their training, the skill development, etc. So I think Ghana too, we've gotten to a point, and even the Ghana First demonstration was a clear indication that Ghanaians are making the point that, oh, these things, we don't, not necessarily that the thing is bad, but what are we also benefiting? What are we getting from it? I think we were initially talking about the numbers that attended. I think the numbers were not very, very encouraging, but now we're in this era of technology, social media, etc. You don't need so many people to be able to converge. I think the main point is that the information has gone out there. And I know when you look at the U.S. Embassy, they have the political desk, and they have people who are monitoring the various radio stations, TV, social media. So the information will go out there that Ghanaians have certain concerns. And the U.S. itself recognizes that now many countries have gotten to the point where, although you are the superpower, when you are dealing with them, just as you, the U.S., you have some permanent interest. Those countries are also looking out for their interests. And our parliament has made it very clear, the minority has made it very clear that there are certain things in this particular agreement which we think must be looked at. And we've said it repeatedly that in the execution, in the implementation, I believe the president and his team will take all that into consideration, and they will be looking out for the interest of Ghana.
Very well, Dr. Ina, your concluding remarks on this.
Well, Abner, what I think about this agreement is that, as both Doc and Adawudu have pointed out, it's very lopsided in terms of you know, what it offers Ghana as against what it offers the United States of America. I think the public sentiment has been overwhelmingly against the agreement as it stands now. And so for me, I think it behoves on the government to go back to the drawing board and then to take a second look at the agreement. I was told that there's a threat to bring the 2015 agreement for ratification, but of course that has expired, and there's no reason why you should bring an expired
this
agreement.
Agreement says it takes precedence over every
a previous agreement. So the thing that the government has to do, and the Minister of Defense, who is in charge of this, should be looking at, recrafting the agreement in a way that will be welfare enhancing for the people of this country. That is all that I can say.
Very well. And given that there's that, pre-existing thing, which of course by virtue of the coming into force of the 2018 one, that is no longer on the table. At least those areas that are in sync or similar to this could be the starting point, and then we look out for the other areas that are coming in afresh. And then perhaps we fashion it in a way that will be beneficial to the state as a whole. So we're moving on to look at another interesting matter, the renaming of the seat of the presidency. I mean, this has, I think there were rumors earlier that there was going to be, it went down, nothing happened, and now the president celebrating his 74th birthday, we have this press release, or was it a press release? Some statements coming from the president that, yes, this is what has happened. Now, I have looked at the statement that the president issued, and I just want to start, because from the basis of the legal authority upon which he acted. He makes reference to Article 58, but I just want to start. I know, and listeners and viewers, Mr. Dawood would have to leave us at some point, so I would start off this with him so that when you have to go, would have had your salient input. Do we take it? Have you had an opportunity to read his statement?
I had a statement.
Okay. He makes, basically there are recitals trying to give the historical, background to the Flagstaff House and all of that, and then concludes by saying that based on or pursuant to Article 58, he acting as the president of Ghana is, renaming that to the Flagstaff House to Jubilee House. And Flagstaff House, which is a building on the premises, would be preserved as such. So tries to distinguish between the new edifice and one that was already in existence, known as the Flagstaff House. Now my question then is are we to presume that there isn't any, if you like, statutory sanctioned procedure for naming public monuments, edifices? And I'm saying this because this isn't the only point of contention. We've had other public monuments. Today it's this, depending on which government is in office, tomorrow is that. And the question is, can't we have something that the nation, as a nation, we all agree that this is the name forever, whoever comes in regardless, this is it? Do you know of any statutory arrangement that speaks to a certain procedure about how to?
Oh, even if there's statute or any allied legislation instrument, all takes their root from the Constitution. So Article 58, that grants that power to the president, it cascades down. And it's a broad power that has been given to him. Which
is why I was referring to have some express provisions by a statute or anything.
It's at the beck and call of the president when he deems it fit to honor somebody or others. I believe that there will be some convention, but not stipulated in black and white, an act which would say that on this occasion you should name this property or this monument with the name of any. We saw some of those things that when Professor Mills died, even the High Street was named after him and others. So it is as and when. But I would say that yes, the
but that as and when is what is landing us in this situation.
Yes,
so tomorrow, government comes in, we change it tomorrow.
I'm not surprised because the politicians can do anything. The only thing they can do is to change a man to a woman. But you see, I wish the president a belated happy birthday. But for me, all this that was done was done to massage his ego, to own it and say that this is what I've done, and few others. Yes, he has the power to do it, but was it at the right time? Was it changing names? It was Jubilee House. It came to Flagstaff House. it's come back to Jubilee House, I will wait for the opportunity to see what it will come. If it will come back to Flagstaff House, and you know, this, yes, governance is a continuum, but if one administration has done something which is good, let's learn to give the credit. Let's learn to give praise where it is due, or honor where it is due. You know, in
but
politics,
on that note,
I'm coming. In politics, there's some concept of ownership. Every government or any person who comes wants to leave something, a legacy, and say that it was during my tenure this happened. So I think it is that concept of ownership and legacy that sometimes drives us to take some decision that upon hindsight we realize that we could have lived it. It is, might not be significant, but because of the legacy of ownership, people would say it will be referred that it was during your tenure or it was during this person. So that is one of the things. So I don't see so much. He has the power. It was granted. It was legitimate, but was it at the right time? Maybe his birthday, he should massage it and say, it was on my birthday that I renamed the Flagstaff House to Jubilee. It will go down history and say, yes, when the president was this. Just like when Nkrumah, people would say Nkrumah was dictatorial. He did this during his time. He did this during his time. You know, presidents have so much power, and if you don't take that and you have sycophants and opportunists and praise singers around you, although you have a well-intentioned plan to execute something, they may mislead you because they are the people who are around you who would advise you. And history has taught us how it should go. So it also depends on people who advises the president, the caliber and the pedigree of the people around to execute some of this thing, because it may lead you, it may be good for you, or it may bring you bad press.
Well, that is true, I get it, but wouldn't that be a risky venture? Because you don't know who you would have in the seat of government at any given day. So yes, you may have a president who is surrounded by, you know, good thinking or right thinking people. Switch it to the next era, you have a bunch of people who are, they don't give a hoot about anything. So then it's important to have that whole arrangement regulated or within a certain, you know, framework, which anybody could get up and say, well, you were to have done it this way. So it's not left to people's good judgment,
you know,
or if you like bad judgment.
Abna, you're a lawyer. You see, it's not everything we can put in black and white. The cold letters of the law, that if it becomes that way, it becomes very rigid, hard and fast rules about how things should be done.
But sometimes laws are, I mean, like you look at the society, the kind of people you have in there, and then you deal with them appropriately.
That's why the Supreme Court has been given that power. I always tell people that I see the Supreme Court more as a constitutional law, court. Because, you see, some of the things they do, if you analyze the judgment of Supreme Court, it's not all they say is law, but they look at society. What is happening within society? What's the economic situation, the social engineering? How do we cement society together? And when they come out, they craft all these decisions and make it law. It stands, you know, it is tried and tested, and you realize that it has spoken. You may disagree with it. At that point, you agree with some of what he said. You know, that is how it has to be. But within politics, you have the hawks, you have the doves. The hawks will always want to have their way, and you have the doves. So that's where, you know, when you combine the hawks and the doves, you have some harmony, and the cool heads will not have to.
What do you have when you combine a hawk and a dove?
Oh no, it's within every political party.
Know, yes.
People who are strong, you know, strong views, and they think, let's do it this way. But the doves will look into it, and the moderators. So you moderate it, and you need to choose people. Yes, you need the hawks at a point in time. You need the doves, and what will be the middle ground?
Very well, Doc. on this issue. Now, Mr. Dawodu talk, no, still you, but I'm making reference to what Mr. Dawodu said, that there's this sense of, ownership, so that it could be referenced to a certain era in our point in time. So yes, this was done by this government, led by so and so, and that recognition, giving recognition when it's due and all. The background to this is, yes, there was in 2007 is when this building was put up, and then in line with the Jubilee celebration, christened Jubilee House. And then subsequently we had a change of government, came and says, nah, we're going back to the Flagstaff House. So at that point, would you say that it should have been left that way, given that, yes, it was built in a certain era? Because in the recitals to this statement the president issued, he talks about all of that right from the colonial era to date.
I think on that one, I think the NDC shouldn't have changed it. Or the thing was, if it was a loan contracted by the Kufuor administration, and they did most of the work before the NDC came. So they put the name Jubilee House. And I think we had a lot of Jubilee parks around which were constructed or refurbished at the time. So when the NDC came, they had a change of name. But one thing we shouldn't forget is that the President of the Republic is the Commander-in-Chief, but he's also the leader of the MPP as a political party. So when it comes to partisan politics in a way, no, he cannot run away from it. And I know he mentioned the hawkish politicians within the MPP who will come and say, this thing was done when we were in government. So we don't understand why a new government will come and say, we think the name should be. And that one, we cannot take it away from the president. So I think, from where I sit, I think the president has done the right thing by trying to say this thing was done by Mr. Kufuor. Mr. Kufuor named it the Jubilee House, so we want to ensure that we maintain the name. For example, the circle, what Mr. Muhammad did at circle, the interchange, assuming he gave a particular name to it and you were a new government and you come and you change it, I don't think posterity will judge you fairly. So on that score, I think I support what the president has done. But moving forward, I think we need, Honorable is a parliamentarian, he may be able to explain it better for us. If a legislative instrument or a constitution, something must be done so that when a name is given in future, nobody will come. For example, we have Professor Evans at Mills High Street. For all you know, a time will come, people may not remember him so much, then somebody will say, then let's change the name. That is not good for us. So let's have a system in place so that when we are even naming places, stakeholders must come together. What should be the appropriate name? And I've been hearing this debate ongoing that even both the Flagstaff House and the Jubilee House, these are names that they are not Ghanaian names. So let's even be thinking about something that would be so Ghanaian, so that when we mention it, you go to other places, no, Flagstaff House, it has a lot of colonial baggages, even the Jubilee, although we don't know so much about that. So the reality is that we can sit down, we may need to put in some countries they have a committee, people from a bipartisan committee, NDC, MPP, civil society, people, political parties that are not even in government. Let's come together, let's float this idea that we are naming this particular place. And once those things are done, it makes it easier. Because the idea that a new government will come, we make changes, I don't think is the best for us. And I know senior people within our two main political parties recognize that we can't be discussing serious issues and all of a sudden we hear, oh, this place, the name has changed to this, etc. It's not good for us. Very
well. We'll need to take a break. When we come back, we'll come back to this issue about the renaming of the seat of the presidency from Flagstaff House to Jubilee House. You're watching New Day Saturday edition. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to New Day Saturday edition. We're live on TV3, also live on 3FM 92.7, and we are online, streaming live around the world at 3news.com, also on our Facebook page, TV3 Ghana. I will take some comments that have come through and then return to the panel. Crispin Mashahudu in Germany says, the NPP majority took Ghanaians for granted by rushing to ratify the U.S. military agreement. The defense minister claims the agreement was at his ministry for about a year and then at cabinet for another 6 months. It then came to parliament where it could be properly debated and improved. but Parliament rather rushed to ratify it without giving Ghanaians a chance to digest the content of the agreement. Our parliamentarians should know that they are there to represent the interests of their constituents, not the interests of foreign countries or their political parties. We need to hold our parliament accountable. Ora Kofi Nkrumah says the NDC and NPP parties are toying with Ghanaians. The NDC quietly signs military agreements with the US in 1998 and 2015. The NPP too renews those agreements the NDC signed. They, the NDC party, are now behaving as if they have nothing to do with the agreement. Ghanaians must wake up. Good morning to your panel. Says, I don't quite get it. I should ask Mr. Ayine, was he eligible evidence provided before, or was there evidence provided before the arrest of Mr. Kennedy Japan? Okay, that's Razak in Chokosi. Abna, good morning. I want to find out from the former President Mahama whether he loves this country. His deeds does not show that. Okay, obviously Mr. President or former President Mahama loves this country, so we can leave it at that. But I will return to the panel, and we have in the studio now, we're left with Dr. Bosman and Dr. Ayine. Mr. Adawudu had to take leave of us to attend to some other matters he had, committed ahead of time. So we'll move on with the two professors in-house. So yes, Dr. Ayine, I'll come to you. Still on this renaming.
Right.
Clearly, reading the President's statement, I get a sense that he's trying to, if you like, solve a problem or a mischief. With mischief is the fact that today we name it this way, tomorrow it's that. Right. So he takes time to go write out all these recitals, and then, like I said earlier, in the end he says, now therefore, in exercise of the power conferred on the President under Article 58 of the Constitution, I, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, the President of the Republic, give notice that the seat of the Presidency of Ghana shall hereafter be known and referred to as Jubilee House, and the property known as Flagstaff House, located on the premises of Jubilee House, shall be preserved and commemorated as such. My question is, does this arrangement here solve the mischief he's clearly trying to solve, so that tomorrow a new government comes, it won't be changed? Does this solve it?
Well, obviously the President is right in one respect, that he draws his power from Article 58 of the Constitution, that he is the receptacle of all executive authority, and so on. But the Constitution is also very clear that the powers of the President must be exercised in accordance with the Constitution, and then also in accordance with the existing law. Right. What he has done now does not necessarily prevent a future president, from renaming, the facility, and giving it giving it a different name. I don't know whether you asked an earlier question about the existence of a statutory framework for the naming of public buildings and facilities. I don't know whether Flagstaff House has ever been declared as a monument, but if it has, but if it has, then it means that under the National Museums Act, the minister for in charge of national museums will be the person, to revoke the executive instrument, by which Flagstaff House was named.
That is if it was declared a national.
That is if it was declared a national monument. Right. And I believe that if what the President wanted to do was to say, okay, the seat of government, it's now Jubilee House. Okay, he could have also done it by an executive instrument. Okay. But again, that doesn't prevent a future president from revoking that executive instrument and naming the house, naming the place, differently. I think that we've gotten to a stage where we have to take, very seriously the question that you earlier asked about whether or not we have a statutory framework. In other jurisdictions, for instance, in the Philippines, public buildings are named or renamed either through an act of the Congress of the Philippines or by proclamation of the president of the Philippines, something very akin to what our president, has just done. Right. So we have to look at the possibility of probably either amending the Museums and Monuments Act or enacting a freestanding piece of legislation dealing with how we name and rename public buildings. It's an important exercise. And even street names, you know, by municipalities and, you know, metropolitan assemblies and so on and so forth. We need to have some guidance by way of legislation for such things, so that it doesn't look as if we are always doing things in a haphazard manner, you know, driven by the political gain, you know, and the needs, I mean, the proclivities of our base, you know. Maybe tomorrow, if NDC in 2020, when we come back to the Flagstaff House, you know, or to the Jubilee House, then our foot soldiers, you know, will also be clamoring for us to rename it Flagstaff House or something. I don't think that it is good for our, I mean, national pride. It is good for, I mean, our political culture. We need, you know, to have some consistency with respect to how we name and rename public buildings.
Very well. And to add to that, wouldn't it also be useful to explore consensus building when it comes to these matters of national interest? I mean, clearly the partisan politics will be there, but shelved or reserved for certain, you know, causes.
Right.
But when it comes to matters like this, there should be some consensus, ownership, where as a nation we all agree that this is it.
Right.
So, because even the example you gave with respect to the Philippines, yes, it would ultimately result in a statute, for instance, or even if it's a proclamation, that could also be subject to revocation or change by whoever comes subsequently. But when there is that level of buy-in or support by the people, then it becomes difficult for any successive government to change. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so, but I mean, one thing we have to know is that, you know, the people as a collective do not partake in the process of governance except through their representatives, except through the elite who rule the country. And the consensus building, I think, must start with the representatives, all right, with us in parliament, with the executive branch, and then also with the judiciary. Of course, the judiciary would not come into the public fray to debate these matters. But matters ultimately, when they are disputed, will get, you know, to the judiciary for decision. And they have to also look clearly, you know, and carefully at the national consensus and then make a decision. Of course, they have to be guided by the law. Right. And if that national consensus is encapsulated in law, that is when they will now have to look at the law and say, this, I mean, a faction is right and this other faction is wrong. Okay. So the consensus building has to start, you know, from the top. And I don't see it happening because of the very partisan nature of our politics, and sometimes even the elite, you know, the leadership of the various parties pander to the partisanship. And that is worrying, because in that kind of context, it is very, very difficult for you to build consensus, because you have to come out looking good for your base, a step of the way. And I think that sometimes as leaders, we need to defy the base if we can build, we have to build national consensus and then move forward as a country.
Very well. Now, Dr. Yin is talking about defying the base to be able to move, you know, in a way that reflects a nationalistic approach to things. That obviously is difficult, but it's doable, isn't it? Oh,
it is, but we shouldn't forget that the base has made you who you are.
Yes.
Today, the base, they've done a lot of work. A number of them, you don't even know them. So you try to have a balance, a balancing act. What can I do to make the base, to some extent, happy? But here again, I think the issue about education, communication, citizens' awareness about the system, very, very important. I think if we have some rules in place about naming, citizens will get to understand that there are some of the things, although we have elected someone as president, the person cannot just do that. Once we get to that point where, because I know for us here, we know if the law says A, B, C, and D, and you are even the president, you are my senior brother, you are this, I know there are certain things you cannot do it because you are operating within the rule of law. And I think our president has always been, I think of late, he's been talking about Ghana beyond aid and Ghana under the rule of law. And you hear these two things in almost all states. So clearly, if even you are the Chief Justice, you are this, you are operating within the law. And I think the parties must do a lot of education, because all these problems we are having in our country is because whether people have been miseducated or they are uninformed about the things. But once a name is given and you are a member of a political, we must understand. But I think the bigger picture is let's have a system in place. If something is done by this administration and they provide a name, it should be impossible for another government to say we are changing it. Once we have that clearly defined, and when it happens that way, it can go to the court, and once the rule says that, oh, NDC has done this, they've provided a name, or when we are even naming it as a new government, we need to consult the NDC and ask them, who do you think should be associated with this? I think if we do that, because as Dr. Ayini said, we can't do that and come back, make some changes. Otherwise, we are, and these are important things, but they are not so much important like we addressing poverty, addressing inequality, addressing challenges with healthcare, with education. I was telling my students on Thursday, I was looking at the budget of Australia. Australia's population is about 25.5 million. Ghana is 28. They are spending $160 billion on healthcare in 2018. And the whole of Ghana's economy is $40 billion. They are spending, and their economy is about $1 trillion. So you look at it and you realize that we are failing our people. So we have a lot of things to do. So we shouldn't allow these name changes, etc., to dominate our body politic. We need to move beyond that.
But it may seem trivial, but one thing too that we observe with the change is the branding of the place, which to some extent comes with some expense, because you need to have somebody do that. And I mean, a whole number of things. Stationery would have to change, because if you had this, letterheads, you need to now procure new sets of letterheads. And we know that in Ghana, procurement is one of the ways by which a whole lot of
the lawyers know better.
Yeah, you know, so it's something that perhaps we need to, you know, steer clear of and try to save the country some money. Because when it comes to contract, I mean, awards, you know what happens with these things. Well, I don't have to go in too much. But quickly, I'll come to you, Doc, again, looking at the president's statement. Right. And I'm making reference to this because, of course, it's through that we got to know this. But also, he's trying, like I said, I get a sense that he wants to fix something. But whether or not it fixes it is another thing. Now, he talks about the fact that, let me quote, he says, whereas there's no record evidencing the renaming of the seat of the presidency as Flagstaff House by His Excellency Professor John Mills, the third president of the Fourth Republic, in purported exercise of his executive authority. Right. That tells me, okay, so if there's no record of anything having to do with the naming of that edifice as Flagstaff House, then it presupposes then that the Jubilee House name was there. That's what it is. If there was nothing to hold on to make Flagstaff House legitimately so-called in terms of anything covering it, then you didn't really do anything legally, as in what you did was of no effect. What Professor Mills did, according to what the president is saying here.
Well, what the president has done here is simply to serve notice of the change of of name, and the last paragraph, you know, he says that, you know, I hereby serve notice that from henceforth, you know, it shall be called Jubilee House and so on. I believe if there was no record, right, but there was public notice, all right, by either electronic or other means of the change of the name. And that should serve as, I mean, a record to, I mean, when he's talking about a record, I believe he's talking about a written instrument in the presidency relating to this matter. Right. Something akin to what he has done. I'm not too sure because I don't have the full complement of information regarding what happened when Professor Mills resumed the reins of government. But I do believe that there was notice to the public that the name will henceforth be Flagstaff House. So that should serve as a record of sorts, you know, I mean, that the name was officially changed. Okay,
but assuming, without admitting that that was the case, according to what the president is saying, shouldn't the conclusion then have been revert to the name Jubilee, as opposed to I hereby declare that it's called so and so, because the Jubilee name, Jubilee House, was already there?
I believe what the president is doing here is to put it beyond doubt. Okay, that, you know, from henceforth, all right, it shall be known and called Jubilee House. He's not, I don't think he's trying to say that the Jubilee House name was ever in any way obliterated because of his reference to the fact that there was, I mean, there's no record of it having been renamed. Okay, so he's simply trying to put it beyond doubt that from henceforth, it is going to be, I mean, a Jubilee House.
Just in case if you were thinking otherwise.
Right, right. and he refers to his constitutional power.
Exactly,
under
Article 58.
Under Article 58.
Yes, very well. That's fine. Now, we just have about, I think, 3 minutes to wrap up, so I'll take your concluding remarks on this and any other that has been discussed here.
I think we've had a lot of interesting discussion from Mr. Ayindowu's statement, and let me say he's one of the people who energizes the base of the NDC. So I think moving forward, I think it's public conduct, very, very important. I know there are many people who look up to him. And when you talk to our students who belong to the NDC, it's very, within the political party, there are some people who bring a lot of excitement. I know in the MPP, when you hear Mr. Japan, although some people will say, oh, he brings a lot of problems. There are many out there. So I think Mr. Ayindowu is in Dambo, so he should henceforth, so that you don't put pressure, you don't put your party in a defensive mode. And I think on the military issue, what I will say finally on it is that in future, the governing party must be seen to be on the offensive. As a political party, anytime you're on the defensive, you allow the opposition to bring the battle to you. It's not good. And we've also mentioned that with the BNI, I think it's a mere coincidence. We are based on the information we have. It appears as if the national security had a plan in place to replace the BNI boss. I think overall, I would say Ghana Beyond 8, all Ghanaians must be committed to it, because our country should move forward. We must make a lot of progress, and if we have to make progress, it means all of us must be very, very hardworking. And in this season where Jesus has died, and we know tomorrow Jesus will be resurrecting, I expect all Ghanaians to resurrect with him, and let's do the good work Jesus did. Let's have mercy on the poor, on the vulnerable in society. Politicians must also not only be thinking about their salaries and conditions of service, but we want to be hearing the parliamentarians saying that the teacher's salary is not good, so something must be done. Well,
I like that.
But when you hear any time of salary adjustment, the MPs are giving about 14,000, 15,000. If they increase by 10%, that's a lot of money. But the teacher in the village is getting 800. They increase by 10%, 80 Ghana. So you realize that the MP, those people are always moving up. Well. And finally, let me wish all my church members, Christ Cares Ministries, in Adenta, happy Easter.
Thank you. Now quickly, Dom.
I didn't know that a professor is also...
He's advocating. It's very important.
A preacher man, Anyway, I think on the issue of the arrest of Koku Ayindowu, my thought is that this was an overreaction by the Ghana police. I don't want to conjecture their motivations for overreacting, but usually it is not proper to arrest before you go back and look for evidence. I believe that you can investigate and then, establish that there's credible evidence of the commission of an offense before you go in and effect an arrest. Because you see, the liberty of the citizen is very, very important. To detain somebody for 48 hours, the constitutional minimum, is a great deprivation of the person's liberty. And so we need to be careful when we are the police need to be careful when they are taking decisions regarding whether or not to arrest someone. On the demonstration, I think it brought to the fore the fact that Ghanaians generally, and though we have not done any empirical survey to know how many Ghanaians are against it, but that citizens are opposed to the current content, of the Ghana-US military cooperation agreement, and that the government, is hereby invited. I'm talking on behalf of the citizens that, they should take a closer look at the agreement to see how it can be refined in order for it to inure to the benefit of the people of Ghana as a whole. On the issue of naming, I think the naming and renaming of Jubilee House, I think that we need as a country to begin to look at legislation that will comprehensively set out the guidelines for the naming and renaming of public buildings, so that one president doesn't come and say, I'm changing the name to X, and then another president comes and says that I'm changing it to Y. we need to have consistency, and we need to build national consensus on a lot of the issues.
Very
That's all
well.
I can say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. On that note, we'll say a big thank you to you, the listeners and viewers out there, for taking time out on your Holy Saturday morning to spend with us here on New Day Saturday edition. It's been Dr. Bosman Asare, Dr. Ayine, and of course we had also Mr. Victor Adawudu on the show this morning. We'll be back same time next week. Until then, do have yourselves a very good weekend and a productive week. Happy Easter to you as well. Have a good day.